this is going to serve as my introduction to culture. Get a lot of questions that relate to culture, that people don't realize that actually relate to culture. And culture basically comes down to why people do things. Why do they do things in a given environment that may differ from how other groups of people do things? And it comes down to culture. Culture is something that we kind of loosely understand because we actually do it, we actually experience it, how it's defined. But most people don't know the technical side of culture. And to explain the technical side of culture to most people, you can see their eyes glaze over. So instead of continually explaining it and sounding like I'm doing a math equation, I've been told by my master teacher, Dr. Johnson, that I should do it in a more comprehensive approach. In other words, gather all the pieces together, organize them in a manner, step by step, where people can actually understand what you're talking about. So then when you give them a brief answer relating to culture, you won't have to do this 10-minute, 15-minute, sometimes hour-long explanation about why culture is important or how this relates. There's a lot of different elements to culture, like demographics, like history, like religion, like socialization, like education. All those particular things are basically human instruments for adaptation to an environment, or either one that's past, or one that's present, or one that they think will happen. They use culture to actually prime the next generation or next generations of people for what they think might be a future event. Some things work, some things don't. But hopefully by the end of this series, I don't know how long the series is going to be, I'm going to try to make it till the end of the month and try to put out at least 2 or 3 videos per week till the end of the month. Hopefully, if I get rolling, I can do one every day. Hopefully no more than like 10 or 15 minutes a piece, because anything longer than that, I know you guys' eyes are going to glaze over. And I want people to see it instead of continually asking me freaking questions about something that they should already have realized to be able to answer themselves. So hopefully with this resource, you can start answering some of these questions yourself instead of bugging me about it, because I just got an email like yesterday that relates to this. Anyhow, let's jump into it. Now, this was taken from Albert Churchward's The Origin and Evolution of Religion. Now, Albert Churchward wrote several books relating to signs and symbols and cultural adaptations, right? So, but this one actually pointed out, will actually give you an idea of exactly how important culture is and how sticky it is and how long it can actually be passed down and how it can change forms, even though we don't realize it. The totem then represented the maternal ancestor, the mother who gave herself up for food to the tribe and was eaten absolutely alive after she had ceased to bear children, because she should never die but always be alive. This was the primitive Eucharist. Eucharist, if you look it up, it's still practiced in Catholic churches today, and was the foundation of all such rites. The body and the blood were veritably eaten whilst alive, and no morsel, however small, was allowed to remain uneaten. It was a sacred feast to be equally partaken of by each member of the tribe. This custom has now died out in most parts of the world, if not all, inhabited by the Nilotic Negroes. And her totemic zootype is eaten sacramentally, in other words, ceremoniously, once a year in the place of the human mother. It is very important to remember that this is the origin of the principal doctrines of the Christian cult, and can be traced through different cults in evolution to the present time in its various phases. We know this as the Christian sacrament, with Jesus that said what? As often as you do this and remember me, take this bread, it represents my body. You can drink this wine, it represents my blood. Right? Remember that? Most Christians should remember that. Even most Muslims should remember that. Still done today in the Catholic Church. The Eucharist is still practiced today in the Catholic Church. One of the oldest sacraments in the world. Basically, the sacrament goes back 150,000 years and has been adopted by many different religions over 150,000 years, and it still exists today. It is a cultural instrument that we still use today. Even in the black Christian church, everybody remembers it. It's called communion. So basically, it is not a white practice. It's actually an African practice that has been passed down through various phases. And we still use it because it's natural to us, even though we don't recognize it. With that being said, the normal state of an organism, whether it's animal, a bacteria, a virus, what have you, if it's a living organism, it has to have some way to adapt to its environment. How animals do it, or other organisms do it, is they use their bodies to face the environment. The environment interacts with them. They use their bodies to interact with the environment. And we call that evolution. As the environment changes, and we're going to go over that as far as time scales later on in the series, as the environment changes, the body has to change to adapt to it. Like when seagoing bacteria formed multi-cellular organisms, and then they came upon land, and they had to develop lungs and whatnot to breathe to a different environment. Same thing. With animals, the body adapts to the environment. Most animal culture is using their bodies to adapt to the environment. As you go up the scale, they use different mechanisms. Culture gets more advanced. But for the basic thing, most animal culture is genetic. It's in the genes. It's inbred as soon as that baby hits the ground. A lot of animals run on instinct. Human beings do not. So, an example of a human being without its culture is this. It's like an animal. Its body, or your body, is reacting to the environment, and the environment is reacting to your body. So if it's warm, if it's cold, if it's wet, if it's rainy, your body has to adapt to the environment that it's around. In some cases, like when you get cold, you shiver, or when it gets hot, you sweat. That is your body reacting to the environment. Same way an animal would. Now, we don't normally recognize this is because we have a layer between us, between the environment and us. Most people, I ask, what is culture? Or they ask, well, what is culture? I tell them what culture is not, because it's easier to explain. This is you without culture. Everything else is culture that allows you to do what? Adapt to this. It allows this to adapt to this. Now, this is the primitive culture. Okay, as you can see that instead of your body being against this, the environment, you have this interface layer. We call it culture. And culture is everything from the clothing, your houses, your weapons, your tools, you're growing food, domesticating animals. All that is allowing you, this human organism, that body, to feed itself, to survive in its surroundings, in its natural surroundings, to thrive and survive. That's what little guy does for you. Now, Quigley's more modern diagram, culture is actually a bigger factor. In fact, culture is actually a bigger ring than your human organism. So you have a much, much broader layer between you and your environment, or your natural environment. Everything underneath all this concrete that we put up, all this asphalt that we put up, is your natural environment. The dirt underneath is your natural environment, not the stuff that's on top. And this The stuff that's on top that we put, the layer that we actually put between us and our natural environment is called culture. And all the instruments or hierarchies that we have to actually adapt on this planet is actually inside this thing, inside this ring we call culture. Another thing we're actually going to talk about is the nature versus nurture in human development. And I found this a while back because it's a good diagram of how this particular mechanism works. When they say nature versus nurture, what they mean is biology and environment versus what? Culture. This is your biology or your instincts versus your culture that you're taught. And this is how culture actually interfaces with evolution or gene expression. Like normal evolution is like an animal, but the thing is, with the experience, which your culture actually starts self-selecting which genes are going to get passed on. And these two things affect the current organism or the offspring. They do what? Help it adapt to what? The current environment, which is something I always talk about what women do and what women look for as far as mates. And these two things, the current situation, these four things, the gene expression, the experience that's been passed down, because these things get passed down into the current organism to help adapt to the current situation. And these four things actually affect the behavior of people or the organism or the person. And then the feedback loop is what back into evolution. So all these things self-select. Culture gets built in by doing that into evolution. Human beings are one of the few people who actually do that. Few creatures that actually do that. Now this stuff is culture. This is a hierarchy representation of culture. This is out of Quigley's book, The Evolution of Civilizations. And these are the 6 layers that he put up, which is an extension of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. These needs are what culture is built on. And you have to satisfy these needs as you go up. And you have to have a cultural instrument for each of them. So all your cultural instruments are actually built from these needs of the organism to adapt to what? The environment. So as we go through this thing, bit by bit, hopefully bit by bit, we're going to actually build a picture of what culture is, how it's built, some different components of it, maybe even some different examples of it, so that we can actually have a reference of how I think of culture, how I describe it, or how I understand it, because it's only my understanding. I am not an expert. I don't have a PhD. This is not my expertise of study, but this is how I understand the world. That's how I understand people, and so far it has done me fairly well over the past 20 years. But anyway, this is my introduction. This is my overview, and I'll see you students, on the next video. Shout out to Root Imp. Jump in since you want to teach culture and you want to be the master teacher. Jump in and teach me what I don't know. Well, with that, I'm out of here. Peace.